I just read a news article just a couple days ago that popped up on my screen, and it had the headline that Paul McCartney's lost bass guitar has finally been found. And I said, wait, what? I didn't know he lost one. Maybe one of you mentioned it to me. I don't know. It didn't register if you did. I suddenly got curious. What's the story behind this? I want to know more. Well, from time to time we hear of instruments being lost or stolen, and it's always a huge tragedy and of course an emotional upset and even professional performance upset for whoever is using the instrument. And so I got incredibly curious. What's the story behind this? How did it happen? And how long has it been missing? I guess it's been missing for practically half a century now. And so I did a little bit of digging, and along the way I started thinking about the whole scenario and everything like that, and this idea of losing an instrument. So this lost bass, I guess it was a rather special one for Paul McCartney, and it was lost, stolen, during the time when they were recording their final album, Let It Be. Well, as you know, I'm going through the whole Beatles 150 series right now, so I haven't made it to Let It Be yet. I will eventually. And if you're on my Ko-fi and Patreon, you can always check it out there. And if you're not, you might want to look and see what I have there, because I am putting the whole series there. I can't put it on YouTube because of copyright issues. But this lost bass. Well, it turns out that back in 2017, I think, somewhere around there, some Beatles fans started a project to try to find this bass, which had been lost for so many decades. And it was called the Lost Bass Project. They had different leads, and they, through the whole sleuthing community, they thought they might have tracked it down, and then it turns out it was a false lead. Everything kind of simmered down for a while, and then last fall, 2023, sometime in the late summer, autumn, there was a news item run about the Lost Bass Project, and it kind of revived the whole thing. The public became a lot more aware of the efforts, and through all that series of events, they finally got a lead which brought them to the family who ended up in possession of that bass guitar. And then just a few days ago, just last week, it was announced on social media that the bass had finally been reunited with McCartney. And I saw a picture of McCartney holding his bass. I did a little bit of looking. I saw some of the pictures of him from the early days when he was performing with the bass, and it gave me a really good feeling, because as a musician, I know what it is to be connected to an instrument, to really become part of an instrument. It becomes a sort of extension of oneself. In a way, the instrument becomes us, becomes me. It's my voice. When I sit down to play it, what comes out of it is me. And it's entirely reliant on me, my mood. How am I physically in that moment? Am I tense? Am I relaxed? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I tired? Am I out of shape? All of this comes out in the sound. And so the instrument becomes sort of an amplifier, and at the same time, it's more than just an amplifier, because the instrument itself responds to what we do, what I do, the way I touch it. It has its own voice, and it gives this voice to me to use. It's a very special dynamic. And, well, as musicians, especially professional musicians, we end up with this sort of funny mix of pragmatism and attachment. When a student gets their first instrument, they tend to just fall in love with it and become so attached to it, and then it might come time that they should move on to a better instrument. And they're so emotionally invested in that first instrument, it can be really heartbreaking to give it up. And so through the years, as a student, as a professional, you learn to become a little bit more pragmatic. You begin to think, okay, yes, I might love this instrument and I might have become intimately acquainted with it, but it can't quite be related to as a child or a spouse in that way, because you have to be willing to give it up or to trade it out for something else when it serves the music. In fact, I've personally cycled through so many different harps. When I was a student, my teacher, when I got my first harp, she warned me. She was straight and direct, and she said, never become sentimentally attached to the harp. Go ahead, the first day you take it home, you start planning to get rid of it. Because you should always choose the instrument that serves the music best. Don't settle on an instrument that maybe it's a fine instrument, but it doesn't serve the music. And fortunately, I kind of managed to keep that in mind through the years. It was always hard to give up an instrument. Of course, we become so intimately connected. We get to know it so well. We know its funny little quirks, its foibles. We know its moods. And believe me, instruments can have moods just as much as a human can. We know if it's an instrument that hates a rainy day, or that doesn't like the cold, or, if it's too hot, maybe it squeaks, or if you take it for a ride, maybe it starts to buzz and rattle, and all these things that put it in a bad mood. And then we have to learn how to coax it back into performing mindset with us. And we have to do it without force, because to force means to interfere with the instrument's ability to speak as well as my ability to express. And so all of that is part of a musician's relationship with their instrument. Of course, as a student, and you're progressing up through the levels, depending on how rapidly you're progressing, you might cycle through instruments very rapidly. But eventually we end up with an instrument that we are probably going to spend hours, days, years with it. This happens to be one of them. Maybe someday I will sell this instrument and get a different one for a particular purpose. Maybe I will get to the point where I find one that suits me better or suits the music I am working on better. Maybe if I am rich and have the luxury of doing such things, I might buy a separate instrument to have two instruments, depending on what I'm working on, because each instrument has its own musical quality. Sometimes you want a bright sound, sometimes you want a warm sound, sometimes you want something that responds like quicksilver in your fingers, other times you want something that's more luscious and verdant. So that is a little bit of how and what we think about when we're choosing an instrument. And that is a little bit about what makes the union between an instrument and performer so special. The way one interacts with another is always one of a kind. It's not just the instrument. I have experienced myself cases where a very fine instrument and a very fine performer, you put the two of them together and they sound really awful. They just don't work together. I have witnessed other times when a student, somebody who's not fully developed as a musician, and an instrument that is maybe not world class, you put the two of them together and suddenly they both sound on a different level together. I've experienced it to some degree myself. I sit down and play a harp that sounds fine under somebody else's fingers, and I try it and I think, I'm not sounding good on this. I sit down at another harp that someone else is struggling with, and suddenly I feel like, oh, this is just fluid. It's liquid gold between us. And then, of course, there are these special needs of a performer. What I mean is things like body proportions, hand size, height, shape, length of fingers, width of the palm, the thickness of your fingers. When you find an instrument that agrees with who you are, it's a treasure. Well, why do I say all of this? Because as I was reading and doing all this research, trying to understand the story of McCartney's bass, I came across some comments by him. And he said that this bass was special. He liked it a lot because, well, he's left-handed and he plays left-handed. As a harpist and pianist, I don't have that option, really. I mean, both hands, it doesn't matter. But bass, violin, whatever, you can play this way or this way, and he plays left-handed. This particular bass guitar is a 1961 electric Höfner bass guitar, and he bought it for a mere approximately $37 from Hamburg, Germany, during one of their extended tours there. And he said, because I was left-handed, it looked less daft because it was symmetrical. I got into that. Once I bought it, I fell in love with it. It sounds to me like maybe his first reason for buying the guitar was, we could even say, a little bit of vanity. He thought maybe if he has this guitar that's violin-shaped, symmetrical, then he won't look so silly playing a guitar backwards. But then he said, once I bought it, I fell in love with it. And he played the instrument during the Beatles' first two records and also on such hits as Love Me Do and She Loves You. Well, you know, it's sometimes like that. You get an instrument for practical reasons or whatever reasons, and then you realize, this instrument is really mine and it belongs to me. It belongs, the two of us belong together. And it gets to be a very special connection, even to the point where if you scratch it or it gets a little scar some way or other, it's painful. I know sometimes, there have been a few times when my harp got a little ding on it, and I was upset for days afterwards because, why did I do that? And it's not like it's a perfect instrument. This instrument is more than 30 years old. So of course it's going to have these marks, but to inflict one myself or to have one inflicted in front of me, it hurts. And at the same time, you start to remember those marks. They sometimes have special stories about them. There are certain episodes with my instrument where something happened and the circumstances around it are memorable because it was a big marker for me one way or another, or just the whole circumstances around it have memory. So that's the kind of connection we end up with. And I imagine McCartney, having played this guitar so much, well, here's another thing I found out. He wasn't even sure how long this guitar would hold up. It seems that he had a similar one before, and it broke or was destroyed in a performance or something. And so he wasn't sure if this one would last very long. But in fact, by the time it was stolen, he was using another guitar more often, coming back to this idea of serving the music, choosing the instrument that serves the music. But he still hung on to this one, and he would still pull it out for various reasons, various purposes, different times. And so this whole dynamic of, okay, I'm trying to imagine Paul McCartney. He's built a career. This guitar has lived with him through Beatlemania. It's been the instrument that took him through that period as the Beatles rose towards the top. And then, of course, he gets a different bass. He gets, other instruments. I don't know how many. I didn't go that deep. But this one, still, he holds on to it, and he still finds ways to pull it out and use it because it does have something special. And then, as they're recording the final album, it disappears. It gets stolen, I guess, out of a van on the street. And it's gone. After a bit of searching, it seems he kind of gave up ever finding it again. He wasn't sure if maybe it was destroyed or what. And then, of course, along come all the Beatles fans, and eventually, many years later, start the Lost Bass project. And thanks to them, through all this sequence of events, which I won't go into, you can look it up online if you want, the details of how this was tracked down. It's really quite sweet and beautiful because the people who have it now, who had it recently, they didn't steal it. It ended up in their possession through the different courses the guitar took. And of course, when they recognized and realized what it was, they immediately wanted to return it to the rightful owner. And that's incredibly sweet and special, and a lovely end to quite an adventure for the guitar. And I'm happy that it was returned while McCartney is still alive, so he can enjoy his old friend again. Well, not surprisingly, the instrument is now valued much more than the $47 that he paid for it way back then. It's now valued in the millions, 12.6 million or something like that, partly to do with its celebrity status, or perhaps a lot to do with its celebrity status. And I don't know if it will ever go on auction anytime soon, but it's a very valuable instrument. And so, as this guitar's whole adventure comes to an end, Paul McCartney was finally reunited with it, and I'm sure they must feel like old friends right now. And I'm incredibly happy for him, for them both, if I may say so. And now you know a little bit about why. I'll see you soon.